Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, right.
We have a lot of slides. Yeah.
Yes, I have a lot of slides. I'll try to rush quickly through them.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, I'm speaking about what I've described as Nigerian dwelling languages and the backlash phenomenon, and the prognosis for the resurgence of African languages. I have the introduction here, and what I'm saying is that the Nigerian linguistic landscape is marked by multilingualism, just like most African countries. And then there's hierarchical interaction of the indigenous languages with colonial languages. That is to say, most indigenous languages or all indigenous languages are subordinated to colonial languages in the African situation. We also have a situation of ambivalence, incoherent government policies, power asymmetry between the languages, ethno-political duels, and what I have called linguistic precarity. I will explain that in a moment. It's also marked by backlash, a perpetual search for an indigenous lingua franca and official language, and then the possibility of resurgence of African languages. I look briefly here, as you can see, at the Nigerian socio-linguistic landscape and the classifications that we have, the number of languages, there are several. Of course, there is a controversy regarding whether these are all languages or dialects of languages. It's part of the problem that we have that everybody believes that, of course, the language that he speaks is a language on its own. Linguists have not helped much by their parameters for or distinguishes languages according to certain morphological and lexical parameters, which on the whole may place a dialect as a language. So we have these classifications there. I don't need to bore you with these classifications, which I believe many of you are familiar with. I'll just go on to some of the things that I really want to say on this program, and I call it conclusion. And I brought this conclusion up because of the limited time that I have and the fact that I do not wish to not get there. So the points I'm actually making here in this presentation is that, and on which the note on which I'm going to conclude, is that the central role of the English language to Nigerian development is over-romanticized. Most people who are advocates are saying that we cannot do without it and so on and so forth. Whereas in reality, it's a small section of the populace comprising the elite that actually reaps the benefit, while for the majority of Nigerians, the English language has been a purview of sorrow and anomaly. So what I want to try and do is to construct what I call an adverse sociology of the English language in Nigeria by revisiting aspects of what I've also called elsewhere linguistic precarity in the Nigerian society, which comprises of linguistic and affective factors. It is this precarity, as I'm going to try to demonstrate, that has led to considerable backlash. However, a positive effect of the backlash is that it also creates waves of resurgence and interest in indigenous languages. So in this paper, I've identified 3 waves of this backlash. And the way forward, which is to strengthen policy to elevate the indigenous languages to the status of official languages and to construct a polyglossic rather than diglossic multiglossic society. Okay, so the parameters of what I have called dwelling languages, and as you know, the term dwelling languages has been used in another context by Miles Scotty, but I'm using it here in a different sort of context, dwelling languages and dwelling peoples. And what we know that the dwells result from a colonial strategy of divide and rule, which lumped so many disparate entities together. And that the consequent tussle over the issue of language is an extension of the tussle for power and identity. Therefore, any debate that concerns the adoption of one language out of these so many languages has always ended in acrimony. Contrary to what advocates are saying, English is not necessarily neutral in this matter. It's actually a combatant. It's not a regional dialect, but it's a social dialect, the standard variety of which is accessible to only a few. But it then has power over the rest, while it places the vast majority in precarity. So these arguments that I've looked at here is, on the one hand, that the colonial languages breeds incompetence and so on. On the other hand, that it helps competence, encourages international access, and so on. So I want to look briefly at these arguments. We are all familiar with the argument of the likes of Ngugi wa Thiong'o and people like Oshundari from Nigeria, and some others. Let me just go on quickly to Pra in South Africa, who has been a strong advocate of the use of indigenous language. And it's all to say that language is central to decolonization, and that any move to, or any interest in decolonizing the entity must start with language. Language competence also falls into three levels: general cognitive development, learning and environmental influences, and positive language attitudes. So of these three levels, I am identifying B and C as the problematic levels in the Nigerian environment. I also look at language attitudes. How many more minutes do I have? 2 minutes. That's
but it's okay. Don't worry.
Right. Okay. So the adverse sociology of the English language in Nigeria, I look at that, and then I look at examples. You can see some of these examples of the stigmatized usages that we have in the Nigerian situation. But it would be wrong to assume that it's just people in the streets. We have these evidences of incompetent usage and stigmatization, which then generates some kind of backlash. It is on that level that I then identify three levels or three waves of response: from the citizenry, from linguists and activists, and from those I call diaspora moms. You can see some of these reactions here, these backlash reactions. Defending the English language, freedom to express in his or her own language. We should be comfortable with indigenous language. So there's backlash in the streets. People are reacting, and that's very important. Then those are called diaspora moms are also expressing this backlash. So I've used the examples of Yoruba moms in Germany, in Finland, in the US, creating a demand because they are looking at the future generation of their children. They're looking at their children and the future. So they are creating a demand for the indigenous language. This is coming unexpectedly. And linguists and activists are using this as a model. You see, once you lose the language, you're going to have to start crying for it eventually. So I've used these other examples, and I'm going to have to stop and go back to that conclusion and the way forward, which is to strengthen policy to elevate the indigenous languages and the status to the status of official languages using a polyglossic model rather than the diglossic one that we currently have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Taiwo. A good start. Maybe we should have said that at the very beginning. It is really too complicated if you want us to listen to any sound, because on your computer as a presenter you can hear it, but it's not captured for everyone. So
yeah.
Not a good idea. But of course, Taiwo and I hope the others, we will make the presentation available, and then you can click on the link if it is complete, and then you can listen to it. So that should be no problem. Once you have the presentation on your own laptop, you can listen to all the examples, and you should be able, to enjoy that. Okay, if there are no immediate, go ahead. If there are no immediate questions, we can go ahead, and Liberty is next. We are getting there.
I have deliberately set myself a complicated kind of topic, which would normally have read alternatives and imperfect futures, but I have used the solidus there to complicate what I see as alternatives and imperfect futures. I preface my talk by referring to Shakespeare's The Tempest. And for those of you who are literally minded, you would remember that Caliban is the sole owner of the island upon which Prospero finds himself shipwrecked. But Miranda, the white daughter to Prospero, calls Caliban by the following names: abhorred slave, savage, that his language is gable, that he is a thing most brutish, he belongs to a vile race. But I was just referring to the ways in which Miranda has labeled Caliban, and Caliban's response to that is that you taught me language and I know how to curse in it. So my talk revolves around those possibilities, therefore, of the sacredness of human dignity, human freedom, justice, equal respect, and respect for pluralism, particularly with relation to languages. I argue that education, especially at tertiary level, has been touted as a platform for redress, for reform and rearticulation of hope and redemption for marginalized people, which the previous speaker, I think, has cogently referred to as linguistic precarity. But I want to argue that what has not happened in sub-Saharan Africa, and perhaps Africa at large, is a strategic appropriation of the education sites and processes for the development of a pedagogy of hope. My argument, informed by decolonial theory, urges us to move from discourse to action, where I see the academy not as a paradise, but learning is indeed a place where paradise can be created. And therefore, the classroom in which the English language, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and the native languages of the land kind of intermingle and interface, of course, giving preference to the colonial languages, the classroom still remains a location of possibility. In an earlier paper, I used this map to show how much the English language, through the technological devices that we have, be it the iPhone, be it the laptop, be it the computer, is kind of suffused in the English language with so many variations of corporate control of the English language. You would see Google everywhere, Facebook everywhere. And as you gravitate towards Africa, you move from an ocean of information to a continent and space of spam and very little that contributes really to the debates, be it in English or any other African language for that matter. So in terms of ownership, no African country owns a mobile phone yet. And that's the irony. All its components are extracted in raw form from Africa. Chartered accountants and the most expensive white-collar jobs are kind of located in the UK. America is what it is today out of the expatriation of black hands in that dark era of slavery. And then you've got the publishers and the greatest names in publication are Longmans and Palgrave and OUP, Jonathan Ball, you name them, and all as preferred academic publishers are owned by the West, which publish in English. Talk about international journals, and we still have the same kind of challenge where currency and recency is obtained from publishing in English and publishing in Euro-American kind of journals. We are looking, therefore, at what I see as extractive capitalism, which is not, by the way, just extraction of timber and minerals. This is expatriation of knowledges through and in the English language. The previous speaker has cogently argued about decolonization and made references to Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I would add the voices of Frantz Fanon and PLO Lumumba, where these scholars and these language activists, if I could call them that, call for decolonization of the mind. It would be interesting, actually, to recognize the irony in which a decolonial scholar like Walter Minolo and his colleagues have commercialized the decolonization agenda through a certification summer school hosted in the Netherlands. I'm getting to the end. Thank you. So what are the strategic alternatives that we have here, where we see certainly a demand for English as the language of teaching and learning, which has invariably enabled the deployment of a number of electronic communication and computer-aided technologies to move massive financial and intellectual capital across the globe, predominantly out of Africa to metropolitan Euro-American capitals. I see globalization that is witnessed in the proliferation of private schools and private academies in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, in Zambia, and the privileging of Cambridge International Examination, again in the English language, at the expense of local examinations in local languages. So, to conclude, probably I would want to refer to a famous who says quite strongly the iambic pentameter, and therefore asking questions about who produces or consumes what knowledge, where and why, serves to shift attention from the enunciated to the enunciator. Thank you.
This is great Zimbabwe indeed. The ruins of the ancient city that the country is actually named after. And I thought I should start with this because it actually gives an illustration of, because I want to use this as an illustration of how ideas can be empowering and disempowering. For a long time, and even today, there are people who think of culture as stuff, as temples, statues, written literature products. And such things were thought to be non-existent in sub-Saharan Africa. And therefore, of course, it was possible to conduct this dehumanizing discourse saying that Africans had no culture. But then people came across Great Zimbabwe. And what happened, of course, is that all kinds of theories were constructed that can still be found in the scrap heap of history that showed that all kinds of people could have built Great Zimbabwe, but not Africans. So there you see how a certain view of culture is used to disempower and deny African identity. The idea of empowerment and disempowerment has its origin in feminist thinking. Empowerment is a type of thinking that challenges existing power relationship and increases the scope for agency, whereas disempowerment takes away the possibility to raise such challenges. Obviously, this kind of thinking is related to concepts such as decolonization or to Southern theory, but it works better for me to present it this way. So, as we've seen, I think that looking at culture as artifacts from the past is not particularly empowering because it sort of keeps away from a discussion of what cultural identities are now. It's also not something I think that is due to disappear as soon as the great socialist revolution will make us all equal, type of thinking often found in vulgar Marxist thought. And it's also not, it can also not be reduced, I think, to the mobilization of difference, because that draws attention to the negative side of culture, whereas there is also a positive side. Instead, what I propose is to look at culture as a value system that serves as a common point of reference to a people. And I need to explain this a little bit more. People are brought up knowing about their culture. They are brought up knowing about the specific norms, the values in their society, but they don't necessarily accept everything of that culture, right? So individuals vary greatly in their support or rejection of aspects of their society's culture, but at least they know what is the norm. What this means, though, is that talking about a cultural group is not assuming that everybody is homogeneous. There can be a great deal of variety within one cultural whole. And I've used this approach and the method of cross-cultural psychology to try and get to grips on what cultures are evolving like in Africa, for example, in Southern Africa. It would go too far to go into the method of this, but what you should see in this picture is it represents, in a way, it's a reductionist picture, but it represents the Sotho in Lesotho and in South Africa. And what you should remember from this is that those two pictures are different. In other words, whereas at some point in the past, the Sotho, no matter where they lived, may have been part of a linguistic but also a cultural whole, that doesn't seem to be the case any longer. In fact, the Sotho, the Swazi, and the Tswana in South Africa resemble one another more. What seems to be happening is that there is, at least partially, some form of national cultural identity forming in South Africa that is different from the identities of the neighboring countries. I think this kind of knowledge is empowering because it is non-essentialist. It looks at African cultural identity as dynamic and positive, and it allows us to do research into where things are going, and it would enable us to develop policies that help to promote African culture rather than going against the grain. Now let's turn to language, another large area. Languages are often distinguished on the basis of the criterion of mutual intelligibility. And there are some databases that try to list all the languages on the earth, but they use additional criteria as well. And what several authors have pointed out, that this is contested, this is socially constructed. And it allows, for example, English to be shown as one language, in spite of the existence of many world Englishes, but Oromo, spoken in Ethiopia, as 4 different languages. And it leads to the often repeated statement that you see everywhere about more than 2,000 languages in Africa. In itself, that statement may be true or not, but it works out in a disempowering way because it portrays Africa as being hopelessly fragmented, and it blocks a discussion of using African instead of colonial languages more. And in the literature, you find one way out of this problem, and that is by not talking about languages as bounded objects at all. That's the Pennycook school. But I think that's also disempowering because it tends to focus attention to languages as spoken, and it hides sight of the role of languages in more formal domains. It seems the current context as a given. So instead, what I propose is to make a distinction between what I call discerned and designed languages. The concept of discerned languages, more linguistic in nature, points to the social act of pronouncing a speech registered to be a language. The concept of designed languages is more sociological in nature, and it points to the process of standardizing and institutionalizing certain languages, of intellectualizing languages. And if you look at these concepts, you can see how that works out, for example, in a country like Germany. The ethnologue lists 15 German-like languages spoken in Germany. But speakers of all of those 15 discerned languages use Hochdeutsch, standard written High German, as their common designed language. And all Germans have to go to school in order to learn that language. Almost nobody speaks it at home. So to learn a designed language, you need some level of formal learning. And these designed languages can serve a number of discerned languages. And of course, in Africa, that would be possible as well, for example, for the Bay languages. What we can now see is, in fact, that saying that all 2,000 plus discerned languages in Africa should be treated the same way, should get the same rights, only serves to strengthen the position of the former colonial languages. You have to move beyond that. And I propose 5 principles for rational choices here that I will skip now for the moment, but you can read them in the paper. Many authors, and even here in this panel, are arguing for an increased use of African languages, but in reality, nothing is happening on the ground. And I think that is in part because the current state of theory doesn't help us understand the current language ecologies in Africa. And I think the concept of discerned and designed languages can help us refocus on the importance of policy and on the need to make rational choices here, and the possibility, in fact, to make rational choices. Of course, you're going to need to do a lot of research if you want to follow up on these kinds of ideas. One thing perhaps to note is that there is not a one-on-one relationship between culture and language. Africa has larger cultural traditions that employ many different discerned languages. And it's not necessarily to say that if you promote one designed languages to serve a number of discerned languages, that you're somehow denying people their culture or whatever. Still, it is true that developing African languages will be key to the evolution of African cultures and therefore also to development. I'm entirely with Pra there. So there's a lot more to this, and I hope you will be on the lookout for my dissertation on language education and identity in Africa that I hope to be able to defend later this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping to the time perfectly. I'm really grateful. I appreciate that. And I have sent a warning to Emily already so that she can get ready and talk to us.
I can say that language issues are very complex ones in Africa because the continent is home to many languages which do not have the same status. And also the linguistic situation of post-colonial Africa is referred to as a diglossic one, where languages do not fulfill the same function within the society. So here we're going to take education as any activity that impart knowledge of skill or the knowledge acquired by learning and instruction or the gradual process of acquiring knowledge. So any activity meant for training through a process of instruction falls under the scope of education. Our research objective here was to analyze the linguistic and cultural barriers to learning and development in Africa. And the questions we've asked ourselves were, how can language and cultural barriers be an obstacle to development? Or how can the wrong use of language in education explain the delay, I can say partly the delay of Africa, and what are the challenges to take up to improve the situation? So the methodology we've used is the following. We had existing literature on education and language issues in Burkina Faso and Africa. Many researchers here have worked on those issues. So we have Malgoubri, Napon, Casamias, somewhere else, and Dudjano in West Sub-Saharan Africa. Laws provisions also have been analyzed, as well as language policies and the development of new teaching materials in Burkina Faso. We've also collected data from research work, field work on justice and health in the field of justice and health in Burkina Faso. We also had workshops organized here at University Kizebo in 2017 and 2018. So the literature we are relying on, we can state the education systems where, according to Casamias, each national system of education is characteristic of the nation which created it and expresses something peculiar to the group which constitutes that nation. Hence, we can assert that each nation has the educational system that it desires or deserves. However, in most African systems, there has been no creation but transfer of education systems while the context of reception were not the same. So the relationship that we see between culture and language has been documented. So Ngugi wa Thiong'o, that most of you were referring to, made a good contribution. So colonial language was brought to Africa along with the culture of education practices and methods. And also it has been demonstrated that the relationship between language, mindset, culture, and identity is obvious. So Asamoah pointed out the fact that Kwame Nkrumah found that colonialism dehumanized the cultural personality of the African by, among other things, attacking African culture and worldview through epistemology. Also, we have the fact that culture carries rules for thinking. So Europeans introduced a type of educational system that transported total European cultural nationalism to the colonies in Africa. Hence, the mission of African education was, and is still, to promote European culture and ways of thinking through the use of their languages. So what we have found is that in Burkina Faso and most African countries, the political and economic environment prevent the use of local languages in education. There's a lot of pressure from various funding agencies, such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and other UN institutions. The World Bank even recognized that fluency in imperial languages may help promote political stability and build national unity, as well as serve economic purposes. So breaking with established rules requires a strong economy, because there's no need to adopt policies if one is unable to put them into practice. And the importance of language issues has also been pointed out in communities. Language planning plays an important political role. It contributes to keep peace among communities. As Mr. Ouedraogo mentioned, most conflicts and civil wars have their roots in the question of language, ethnicity, and the sharing of political power and economic resources. And we've also noticed that economically powerful nations naturally wish to expand their languages as natural and normal vehicles of their thoughts, their cultural values, and their ideologies that they may want or even force other people to adopt. So this leads to obstacles to development related to language and education in Burkina Faso. We're going to point out the field of justice, where the judicial system of Burkina reproduced the French one in the language and the operating mode. So many people, even educated ones, do not understand the technical language used in tribunals. And in the field of health, there's no need to say that communication is very crucial, and failure to adequately communicate creates major health problems. Language issues in these fields and their consequences have been documented. For Roth and Chris, for example, who worked on the context of America, communication lies at the heart of healthcare, and without it, providers cannot provide good care and patients are at risk. So they explained that the US hospitals came to be established, they have established as a rule that interpreting be carried out because of social justice, and the fact that it turned out to be cheaper to pay for interpreters than to provide useless care because of lack of communication. So to explain how important the language is in all these fields, major development fields. And since education in Burkina is carried out in French only, we have a lot of doctors posted to hospitals where they do not speak the language of people, of the patients. So this brings about communication problems. And one of our field studies led us to some patients with whom we discussed, and they said that they don't want to be to hospital because they are sure they won't be understood, especially when it comes to HIV screening and other sexually transmitted diseases, where there's a counseling before, so they do not feel confident to speak to another person who would have the responsibility to interpret, to translate what they are saying to the doctor. So this prevents people from going to hospital. I wanted to point out also the negative attitude and the lack of receptivity of the community when people do not understand what scientists or other researchers are doing. The impact of scientific accomplishment depends on the attitude and receptivity of the community. To quote Leshner, I quote, "The ability of science to deliver on its promise of practical and timely solutions to the world's problems does not depend solely on research accomplishments, but also on the receptivity of society to the implications of scientific discoveries. That receptivity depends on the public's attitude about what science is finding, and how it perceives the behavior of scientists themselves." So the language issue here is important because it creates a barrier between those who are in charge of thinking of development issues and those who are supposed to receive the benefits. There's a need for change. So African epistemology needs to be revisited. The way knowledge is found and transmitted needs to be adapted. Most educated people in Africa have a lot of theoretical knowledge and no practical one. Students who leave school without a given level are left without any competence. Why is it that children, this is what we have noticed, children who have followed their parents or relatives in a given trade end up being skilled workers, more competent than those who went to vocational or formal schools? So traditional knowledge must be collected, kept, and transmitted from generation to generation, because Africa has a lot to give, and teaching needs to be adapted. The traditional way of teaching seems to have shown its limits because of the rate of unemployment and many other things. To conclude, we can say that Africa is lagging behind in spite of its natural wealth. This is an observation. And the language issue is among the most important causes because it includes culture. Knowledge, aptitude, and even intelligence have often been and are still associated with the mastery of the colonizer's language, creating a kind of complex with local languages and their speakers. Major development fields such as education, health, justice are hindered by the language problems. And Africa is still carrying the colonial heritage in many aspects, thus perpetuating the colonial system whose main objectives were to dominate other colonies. So I don't know if I have time. I'm going to stop here and say sorry again for the inconvenience and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Very nice, very impressive also for cutting the end short maybe, but I hope we'll have an opportunity to look at the rest, send it and we make it available. Now, a big leap from Burkina Faso to the US. Tesfaye, are you in the US? You here?
I'm very much working on the project. Maybe it was a little bit too complex for me. I'm dealing with issues of epistemology and what the philosophy of Gilles Deleuze offers in terms of decolonization, the potential for looking into ontology and epistemology, critique of representational thinking, and then finally explore the fields of education and language policies in Africa. And I'm getting a lot of encouragement from the presentations today.
Yes, we also want to encourage you, and maybe you can make available your materials at a later point. We can, make it also available to the others. That's what.
Yeah, I would be engaged in the group activity, and I'm deeply committed to this project. But currently, I just it didn't convince me. I'm ready to give a summary of my presentation. That's all.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. Good. So we have still the last presentation, I think, and I've seen Esther there. Can you take over?
I would like to start by saying that this is the preliminary part of a research that is still in progress. Okay, so in 2013, Governor Fashola introduced the teaching and learning of Mandarin in 5 public schools in Lagos State, Nigeria. Okay, so these are the names of the schools. I'll just skip that now and go to the next slide. Now, the aim of this study is to find out the reaction of Nigerians, especially Lagosians, to the program. Now, the study will give us more insight into the linguistic and cultural implication of Nigeria-China relations. Okay, there are a lot of literature on Nigeria-China relations with regards to trade and aids. A little mention has been made in the literature about Mandarin in Nigeria. These are some of the literature review. So Falk talks about Confucius Institutes. There are a lot of Confucius Institutes in African countries, and that's the instrument through which Mandarin is being introduced to Nigerian countries. Okay, but Frederick explains that China is popular with African countries because Beijing offers resources with no strings attached. But however, Ovadia describes China's activities in African countries as accumulation by dispossession. Now, the study made use of the research instrument of ethnography. Data were harvested from 2 online platforms, and you can see the platforms there. Now, reactions to the introduction of Mandarin in schools in Lagos State, Nigeria, have met with several Nigerians have commented about the program, and these comments were harvested and subjected to descriptive and content analysis. A total of 30 comments were analyzed. So from reactions from the net, they are of mixed feelings. Some commentators applaud the decision. Others feel that it is a step that might have grave linguistic and political consequences for Lagosians and by implication, Nigerians. Now, so with the emerging profile of China as the next world power, her interest in any African country should elicit questions pertaining to the genuineness of her actions. Now, let's look at some of the comments from the next. This is a positive comment. It says, by introducing optional Chinese language lessons in Lagos state schools, Governor Fashola has raised the bar of educational standards yet again, in a masterstroke of prudent foresight that will, in due course, be emulated by governors of many other states in the Federation. Now, this person also has a positive comments. He says, my view on this matter is based on economics, and Africans have no economic power, neither can we manufacture anything. Fashola's government is not stupid. Go to Lagos and see what the Chinese are doing on the railways. Give it another 10 years, this policy you are rubbishing will yield benefits to a lot of people. So these are some of the positive comments from the net. Well, why did Governor Fashola introduce the teaching of Mandarin in public schools in Lagos State, Nigeria? He believes that learners may be able to study in China afterwards, since China has emerged a world power of repute. China has also become Nigeria's largest trade partner. There will be ease of communication, which will aid trade relations. And then Mandarin is fast becoming a language to reckon with. So we've been reckoning with English, now we have to also reckon with Mandarin. But some other people do not agree with this policy. Here are some of the negative comments. The negative comments are surround and the fear of the implication of this study on the indigenous languages in Nigeria. One is fear of China's sincerity. Second is fate of Nigeria's indigenous languages. And then could this be the onset of linguistic and cultural imperialism, Chinese economic power, language and power relations? Could this be another subtle form of colonialism or colonization? What are the psycholinguistic dimension of to this whole matter, having to grapple with English, the indigenous languages of Nigeria, and now a second foreign language is being introduced. Or also we have French in the country. French is also learned in Nigerian schools at some levels. All right, now look at some of the sample negative comments. Please, folks, we as Nigerians do not need Chinese language. All we need from the Chinese is their technology. Why is it that we are not interested in our things? A second comment, they want to erode our language completely because even now that the language is being taught, most pupils are still finding it difficult to understand the language that is meant to be their L1. It is an exciting innovation, but I sincerely pity students in Lagos because from my point of view, Chinese language is probably the most difficult thing to learn. Just imagine, can someone understand that? So these are some of the negative comments. Now, when most students can hardly use English fluently, Fashola should apply maturity in whatever he chooses to do with our language here. There's no place like home. Our language and culture define our home to a large extent. The only race on earth who never learns any useful lessons from the past and present are Africans, Nigerians in particular. Worse still, the only people who never develop their own talents and creativity are Nigerians and Africans. Now, like I said earlier, this is a preliminary study using ethnography. The next stage of this research, we employ ethnography. That is, I'll go to these schools. It's been like 7 years the program started. So I'll go to the 5 schools in Lagos and then assess what the program has been like so far. The researcher is already gathering data for the next phase of the study to ascertain the progress of the program after 7 years of its inception. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for the excellent timing, and you'll be remembered in this circle as the one with the attempt to do Putonghua here. I do understand that it is really difficult. Yeah, good. And now it is time for questions and comments. You may have noticed that we had a few discussions in the chat already. So you can either add it in the chat or, of course, I think our connections are really good enough. You can ask using your microphone. So I encourage comments on all these fascinating contributions, a very wide field that we've enjoyed so far.
Yeah, maybe while folks are waiting for to bring up more questions, there was a question that came about the endless search for an official language. And the question is, when is it all going to end? Is it an infinity? Which is a legitimate question because remember when we were talking about Ngugi the other day when we watched his recent program, and we were saying, oh, this guy is still very much there. But we know that his plays, his works on decolonization have been on for about 4 decades or thereabouts. Also in Nigeria, Papunwa and his colleagues did the so-called indigenous language project in Ife. That was in the 70s. And they did that experiment and came to the conclusion that the best thing was for the indigenous languages to be used, at least for primary education, because that would foster cognitive development and do away with the various aspects of interference and other affective issues that tend to block the path to competence in the English language. So this has been on for a very long time. And there's a tendency for people to get discouraged. Part of the problem is also that the English language has a huge army on the continent. And some of us are indirectly also members of this army because we're speaking English and advertising it, and people listen to us and say, oh, but you speak good English. What could be better? Why do you want to change? So these discouragements are there. So it is a legitimate question to say, when is it all going to end? And the answer is that, well, we don't know. But there's a groundswell at this point in time, as I've pointed out, a groundswell of activism in Nigeria, in the African diaspora, in South Africa, and quite a number of countries in Africa, a groundswell of activism aimed in the same direction, the whole question of decolonization. And the fact that this entire conference, which is one of the hugest conferences that I have seen, spanning so long a time. Of course, we know that Corona contributed to that. The fact that it's again on decolonization also points in the direction that non-African partners are as anxious as we are to see that this happens. Now, in a place like Nigeria, everybody, the president, the president of the nation, the president of the Senate, quite a number of people are getting brickbats every time that they open their mouths to speak English. The immediate past first lady of the country got quite some bashing for her inability to speak English, and quite a number of celebrities too. So there's that backlash, and that says, oh, wait a minute, what's all this? Why can't people, in any case, use their mother tongues? Then people in the diaspora, there's this enormous pressure from the diaspora, moms in the diaspora who are looking back and saying, oh, my children must learn their languages because we didn't have that opportunity. We don't want it to continue that way. So it may well be soon. That all these things are going to come to pass. I'm probably sounding evangelical now, but it's also true that Christians have been waiting for that long, and they are still patient and believing that will come to pass. I think we should just keep the good work going.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Of course, Taiwo, you made it a little difficult for other people to ask questions because what you said sounded like a good summary for this morning's sessions already, but maybe anyone else?
Well, if I might chip in, it's been quite interesting, particularly with the diversity of the discussions this morning. Of course, they all point to the linguistic realities on ground. But Professor Schmid, like we've discussed at some points, and of course, like some scholars have also identified that you talk about global Englishes now, and that English is actually no longer a foreign language on the African continent, and you can say the same for some of these other colonial languages. And so, for me, I think there should actually be more efforts at appreciating the diversity and ensuring that alongside these colonial languages, indigenous languages also thrive. I think that's what I personally feel would work, because there are always political implications in saying that a language should replace what you see as the foreign language. But for instance, in Nigeria, you have some 250 ethnic groups who will want to lay claim to having their languages also function as maybe national languages. So it becomes a difficult thing to say you want to house the English language and then replace another indigenous language. And so it could be it's a paradox to me because in supplanting the English language, you're actually empowering another language, which will eventually play the same role that you are castigating the English language for. But of course, what is important to me is develop these other languages, let them thrive, let them have literatures, texts, and then have people who can sustain their life. And then, of course, I particularly enjoyed the presentation by Professor Liberty. Yeah, it was interesting, particularly when you look at the angle of publications, publishing, and how most of epistemologies emanate from the West, and we have to domesticate them, if you would call them that. So how do we move forward by empowering indigenous knowledges and ensuring that they also thrive alongside knowledges from all other parts of the world? Then finally, I would also want to look at the paradox of the home and the diaspora. It looks like people on the home continent are more relaxed. They feel they are more outward looking. They want to learn these other international languages. Meanwhile, diasporic Africans or diasporic Nigerians are more interested in learning the language of the home. So it's I don't know, it's a difficult thing to marry together these realities. Some set of people are looking to get out, while those who are outside are looking back home. So it's a really complex situation. But of course, that's why we have this platform where we can discuss all of these and then look for ways to move forward. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any final comments for this morning?
I would like to bring Professor Bert Pinkston. His concept of design languages is quite interesting to me because it seems to speak to finding ways or looking for a relationship between languages, neighboring languages, and probably it could be a very productive strategy in terms of finding solutions to all the problems that we are talking about. And I would like to hear more elaboration of what he really means by design languages. What are some of the things he's thinking in terms of the various components of this strategy? And I would like to learn more about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Of course, we'll have time to elaborate on this later. Maybe I should also point out that Ton has made another futuristic thought here, contributed in the chat, and you should also look at that so that it doesn't get lost. Are there any final comments now? Because I hope you can all join us again at 2:30. We don't want to keep you too much longer from the lunch break, but any final comments? Or Taiwo, anything else you have noticed?
Yeah, I think we're supposed to end at 1, I think, and we have a few minutes. But if people do not have a question at this point in time, I think we can just say that the session, I think, has been very educating, and maybe by the time people come back, and people are supposed to come back at 2:30, right?
Yes, I think it's a good idea. Officially, we were supposed to end at 1:45, but it doesn't matter at all, of course. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
We have Bahasa Indonesia again as an example, or Bahasa Malay. And of course, we all know Kiswahili as the best model for that too. Filipino, etc. But it's nice to bear all this in mind, and we'll all meet again in the afternoon. I'm really grateful for this diversity of presentations, and exactly. Please come back 2:30 for the second part.
In the first place, allow me to extend my deepest thanks to the organizers of the conference for the opportunity to give a talk at today's session. Let's start. Ethiopia is a highly diverse society with a varied history relating to the issues of ethnicity and language. Due to the presence of more than 75 distinct languages, language policy in Ethiopia has traditionally been a highly contentious matter. For a long time, indigenous languages of Ethiopia have been relegated to a less than equal status with Amharic, a language recognized as a lingua franca in Ethiopia today. And the structure of presentation will be the following. We'll take a look at the historical perspective and then try to make a few general conclusions. Amharic is the language of the Amhara ethnic group, which is not even a numerical majority. But since the 13th century, Amharic has been gradually occupying the dominant position in the life of the Ethiopian state, primarily due to the coming to power in 1270 of the Salmon dynasty, for which Amharic was the mother tongue. Though Ethiopia did not have any clear language policy before Emperor Haile Selassie, it does not mean that there was no language policy at all. For example, Emperor Theodros, who had initiated the tide of centralization in the middle of the 19th century, had a promotive language policy that encouraged the use of Amharic. However, written Amharic was mainly the language of elites throughout the reign of Theodros and two subsequent emperors, Johannes and Menelik II. But it's worth noting that during the reign of the latter one, Amharic reached the premises of local elites and administration offices where it had never been spoken before. However, it was Haile Selassie's understanding of the imperatives of the state-building project, including the fact that homogenizing Ethiopian society was a prerequisite for the emergence of a strong unitary state, and his vision of a nation of Ethiopians that propelled Haile Selassie towards Amharic as a medium of national integration. And the package of measures systematically applied by the regime to establish the dominance of the Amharic language was known to be the policies of Amharization. Coercive measures were taken to ensure that children and adults alike became literate in Amharic. Upward mobility and access to political and economic resources was obtained through proficiency in Amharic. Other languages were suppressed, and it was not legal to teach, publish, or to use indigenous languages for public services. The process of Amharization was facilitated by the fact that the overwhelming majority of Ethiopian languages were then unwritten. Anyway, such policies became a primary source of resentment by non-Amharic speaking ethnic groups. And inequality and lack of integration of Ethiopians from different regional and ethnic backgrounds as a result of this process of Amharization could be illustrated by the fact that resistance to the empire had become organized by ethnic lines. At the very beginning of the socialist regime, of the new socialist regime, there was some movement away from full domination of the Amharic language. The military government initiated 2 literacy campaigns in about 15 languages with the goal of literacy in the mother tongue, and radio broadcasts were made in 4 other languages than Amharic. However, as the military government centralized its control over various movements, and as power came to rest with Mengistu Haile Mariam, there was a change in rhetoric and in practice. In fact, he merely merged the socialist ideology with that of his predecessors and continued with the politics of centralization and homogenization of Ethiopian society. And moreover, the ethnic composition of the military government itself led to the perpetuation of the Amharic language dominance at all levels. Despite some substantive changes in language policy under the socialist regime, Amharic knowledge remained a prerequisite of political and economic participation, and primary schools throughout the country continued to teach Amharic regardless of mother tongues or ethnic groups. The chief ethnic movements behind the formation of the federal system in Ethiopia, in particular the Tigray People's Liberation Front, considered the use of Amharic as the sole official language of government and instruction as a symbol of Amhara domination and the eventual extinction of the identities of other ethnic groups. And though Amharic retained the status of the working language of the federal government, regional governments were allowed to choose which language to use for official purposes. The new language policy principles were reflected in the changes introduced in the education sector as well. States can choose whether to give primary education in a nationality language or in Amharic, and in regions where subjects are taught in nationality language, Amharic is given as an additional subject from grade 1 or from grade 5. As for English, it is given as a subject beginning in grade 1, and it is the medium of instruction in secondary schools and in institutions of higher education. Still, though language policy has been a pivotal dimension of ethnic federalism in Ethiopia, and a signal of the government's commitment to self-determination for all nations and nationalities, the past decades have not led to anything approaching a narrowing of the disparities among ethnic groups in Ethiopia, and some problems still remain. So this is the table which displays the use of other languages apart from Amharic in different regions, in different states of Ethiopia. And some problems do remain. Currently, Amharic is no more in the same footing as it was because its use has diminished due to the opportunities in mother tongue education. At the same time, Amharic still has a restrictive impact for the Ethiopians in terms of access to governmental services, employment, particularly in federal jurisdictions. As a result, the current modality of language policy has neither satisfied the major ethnic groups in Ethiopia, nor went in line with the constitutional goal of creating a sense of equality among different nations, nationalities, of peoples of the country. In this context, there are different suggestions put forward regarding future language policy in Ethiopia. Some experts suggest that the policy aimed at the promotion of one particular language that would serve as a lingua franca in the country and as a foundation for carving common Ethiopian identity should be conducted. However, they highlight the fact that Amharic could hardly serve this purpose, given the fact that it is considered as a language of historical domination and suppression of other ethnic groups. But in fact, we should not forget that a policy of promoting one indigenous language or several indigenous languages in a country like Ethiopia, in a country with more than 75 distinct languages, may produce similar results and may stipulate senses of marginalization and senses of division. In this regard, some analysts recommend to consider a neutral alien language, particularly English, as the language of the federal government for political and economic reasons. However, the most important thing to be noted is that language in Ethiopia has a political dimension because it has traditionally both structured and symbolized the nation-building project. And it seems that the issue of language policy will remain on the national agenda in the near future, especially in light of the fact that in 2020, 4 regional languages, apart from Amharic, Oromo, Tigrinya, Somali, and Afar, were elevated to the status of working federal government languages. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia, for a very clear presentation. I'm sure that the Ethiopian situation offers a lot of scope for discussion, but I suggest that we leave that until we have heard the other papers as well. I think the 2 first speakers are still missing and may not be able to make it. So in that case, let us turn to something completely different, namely, even though in some way still related, indigenizing language for universal use in Nigeria by Professor Franca Atto.
Good afternoon, Chair. Yes. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you sincerely for the invite. So I will share my screen now. Okay. Yeah.
We see it. Yes.
Good afternoon. Yeah. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, good. Now I will be talking about indigenizing language, you know, as a universal.
One question, perhaps you can press F5 or make the start the slideshow as such so that we can see it a bit better. Yeah,
okay,
like that.
Okay.
Yes. From the beginning.
It's okay.
Yeah, now press from the beginning.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Are you okay?
Not quite yet.
Are you all right?
Not quite yet.
Are you okay?
No, you should click on.
So go back to slideshow.
Yeah, and then from the beginning to the left. All the way to the left.
Okay.
There you are.
Okay, I've seen it. Yeah. Yeah, good.
Good.
Okay. Thank you very much. There's the new normal. So the structure of the paper is such that I have an introduction. I'm a sociologist by training, so I'm not a linguist. So I'll be discussing from the point of view of sociology. I'll be looking at theoretical issues. Then I'll be looking at language as an enabler and the game changer. And there's a language that is, coming up sometime in the past. It was more or less like the kind of thing that was discussed in the morning, a language that is being formed, which is not an indigenous language. So I'll talk about that. Then, of course, I will conclude. I have very few slides, okay? Now, of course, we know that one of the greatest problems we have in Africa, including Nigeria, is the fact that most African states are heterogeneous. They are made up of many ethnicities. The one of Nigeria is peculiar in the sense that Nigeria has over 250 ethnic groups and over 500 languages. Now, amidst this diversity, some languages see themselves as occupying the top structure in terms of importance. You have the Hausa language, the Yoruba language, and the language. Because of the population spoken by 63 million people, not only in Ghana, you have them in Senegal, and then you have them in other parts of West Africa, including Burkina Faso. Yoruba is the same in the sense that it is also a transnational language. You have Yoruba-speaking people in Cotonou, the Republic of Benin. You have some of them in Togo. You also have some of them in Ghana. Then you have Igbo language, for instance. Igbo is speaking, a variant of Igbo, for instance, is spoken in the equatorial. Now, since the amalgamation of Nigeria, of the two protectorates, if you recall, Nigeria was, the two protectorates of northern and southern Nigeria were amalgamated in 1914. The official language has been English and its corrupt variant, which is called Pidgin English. Pidgin English is widely spoken across many parts of Nigeria, both by the literate and not so literate. English language is, for me, it is a tool of domination and social practice, in the sense that English language is the language of the colonizer, and incidentally, the language is not inclusive in the sense that it excludes those who don't have the proficiency or enough literacy in order to make use of the language. When Nigeria attained its independence in 1960, I thought that one of the things it should have done was to restructure its language use in the sense that it could create for itself an indigenous language. Nigeria missed that opportunity in the sense that language is a unifying tool, and it makes it easier for people to carve out identity for themselves once they have a common language. And that was what gave impetus to the adoption of a language called Wazobia by the military, when the military was in power. The essence was to achieve social cohesion and then to reduce some of the fault lines. So in discussing this, I've raised two fundamental questions. I asked, is language an enabler, and can Wazobia? Now, in discussing this issue, I've anchored it on ethnomethodological perspective, which is a sociological theory that is more in tune with ethnography. The essence is not to look at theory as theory per se, but to look at the pragmatic essence of theory in the sense of social action. How, for instance, the people negotiate their day-to-day lives, their interaction. You find that members of any society, they have a number of things to share, for instance, meaning, social interaction, business. And one of the tools of negotiating this is language. You use it in business, in politics, in religion. So for me, the thesis of this discussion is that in a heterogeneous society such as Nigeria, that language has become fundamental in the negotiation of social existence. For instance, those from the same language group or those who speak the same language fare better in the negotiation of public good, such as politics, jobs, and other social privileges. If for instance, somebody is a Yoruba, and then you're looking for a job, and the person at the top is also a Yoruba, you'll find that chances are that the door will be open to you easily. The same thing if you were to negotiate a business and you find that the person at the helm is either an Igbo or Hausa. It also happens. But the tragedy of the Nigerian situation is that having over 500 languages, the problem is that if you adopt these 3 languages, like it has been done now, you find that most news are cast after English. They are cast in these 3 major languages. What you're doing is that you're excluding all the other ethnicities and making it seem as if they are colonized. So they are removing one toga of colonialism for another form of colonialism. So my take is that a shared indigenous language will fix the mutual suspicion that characterize social relations in Nigeria. Now, the first question I asked was, can language be an enabler and a game changer? And my take is that this is possible because language is used for communication and social control in human societies. Therefore, in a heterogeneous or a multilingual society, the rallying point for the negotiation of local, national, and international interests should be language. And that is why we're advocating that one of the things we could do is to constitute, core institutional practice that will enable us to, fashion out a language that will bring about social cohesion and then help us to forge, a kind of national identity for everyone in Nigeria. Communication through a universal indigenous language will enhance understanding and cooperation among the various ethnic groups in Nigeria. And equally, the development and adoption of a universal indigenous language will help establish the needs and then catalyze development and usher in a common identity and national cohesion. At the moment, you find that it looks as if we are talking across purposes because there are a number of interest groups. Nigeria is more or less like a conglomeration of different nationalities. And that is because there is no unifying force. And the only way we can do this is if we have something that unifies everyone and everyone sees himself or herself as belonging to the same stuff. Thus, eliminating the mutual suspicion and the attendant competition among the various ethnic groups can be achieved if there is a common unifying indigenous language. Equally, development and adoption of a universal indigenous language does not imply the rejection of languages, because that is the fear of others. That if Nigeria were to adopt a unifying indigenous language, does it mean that all the other 500 languages will now be jettisoned or thrown away? A good example is Kiswahili, that is spoken among across many states in East Africa. You find that despite the fact that it is a unifying language, people still have their own indigenous languages they speak. So language, because it helps intercultural communication and enhances social interaction, the essence of this is that it will help us to understand each other better. It will also help us to reduce tensions and conflicts associated with politics and then eliminate ethnic politics. An indigenous language will also help the ethnic groups to accept cultural norms of other ethnicities and see each other in the same light, and eliminate perceived prejudices and misconceptions about the other. Like I said, Kiswahili is a good example. It's something that East Africa has been able to achieve for itself. And it's working in the sense that it enables them, to interact. It helps them to forge a kind of common identity, achieve social cohesion. Now, the next question I asked was, can language be a tool for social cohesion? The answer is yes. A universal indigenous language will provide a level playing field for all and sundry and reduce the acrimony associated with politics and governance, especially in Nigeria. There's always this tendency for people, especially politicians, to see themselves through the prism and lens of where they come from. And that is why you find that politics in Nigeria has become so acrimonious. But if there is this unifying factor or tool that brings everybody together, people will stop seeing themselves as coming from different ethnicities and then see themselves as belonging, to one nation. It is also equally imperative that an indigenous language that is developed and adopted will aid, will help both at the primary and secondary school to build a new Nigeria. My take is that if, for instance, students are made to study a universal indigenous language from the primary school level up to the senior secondary, and if possible, offer it, at the school certificate level, Over time, there will emerge a new generation of Nigeria who will see themselves as Nigerians and not members of their ethnic groups. At the moment, at the junior secondary level in Nigeria, in secondary school, they are allowed to offer, any language that is not their own language of origin. For instance, if somebody were to be from Southwest, the person can offer Igbo, for instance, or Hausa. But what happens is that the moment they get to senior secondary school, they drop it because it's not compulsory. There will also be a new mindset which will catalyze social cohesion and then help to bring about development. Significantly, using a universal indigenous language will connect all the ethnic groups in Nigeria, irrespective of cultural differences, and provide them a common nationhood. Language will thus become a tool for social cohesion and engender social processes within the country. Now, let's look at the one I was talking about, the Wazobia, which was something that was, being developed. It was developed by somebody from Edo State. And what he did was to make and fashion out a new language. Among Nigerian elites, there is no compelling reason to adopt a universal language. Why? Because most of them are literate and they can communicate in the English language. Therefore, they find themselves negotiating politics and business. However, there are numerous reasons why this position should be, reassessed. First, in order for us to achieve social cohesion and eliminate mutual suspicion and then the attendant competition that is rife in Nigeria, there is a necessity for us to develop an indigenous language that will be spoken by all the ethnicities in Nigeria. Secondly, it will also enable Nigerians to participate in the national space, whether in education, administration, or commerce. Now, I argue that the elevation of Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo as alternate languages has excluded other ethnicities, which makes some of them to perceive this as a form of domination by the three major ethnic groups. Further, development of Wazobia through increasing its vocabulary and developing its lexicon by borrowing from all the indigenous Nigerian languages will promote and give all Nigerians a sense of belonging. It will provide the desired social bond to achieve social cohesion in Nigeria. In conclusion, I argue that this paper has shown the difficulty in adopting an existing language as a national language, especially in a heterogeneous context and a multilingual state such as Nigeria. While not advocating for the replacement of English language as the official language, but there's a compelling reason to develop and adopt a universal indigenous language as a language for the country. It is equally imperative that Nigeria considers the need for a homogeneous language in order to foster unity, enhance social cohesion, and engender development. We must recognize the fact that the current arrangement of adopting the three major languages as national languages smacks of insensitivity to the other ethnic groups. Moreover, the policy is costly and cumbersome. Any wonder that the policy has failed? And rather than bring Nigerians together, in achieving unity, what it has done is to further, further increase the fault lines and then bring about more fracture. Finally, to solve the language question, we advocate the development and adoption, of a national language, while English remains the official language. But the indigenous language, just as Kiswahili, will be the language that every other person will identify with in order to reduce the kind of strife, and conflict which we are familiar with in Nigeria. Thank you very much for listening.
Wow, thank you very much. I'm sure that there are people who want to ask you some questions, but we will leave that until later. And of course, people can also use the chat if they want to ask questions. I will be doing that for one. But let's now turn to, let's stay in Nigeria and let's listen to a talk about Yoruba slang in students' narratives by Dr. Abisoye Eleshin, who is here, I think.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yes, welcome.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to appreciate you for giving me this rare opportunity to present this at this panel. I'm trying to. All right. Okay. So the title of my paper is Yoruba Slangs in Students' Narratives in Lagos, a Linguistic and Sociocultural Implication. All right. So this work examines the use of slangs among the students of the University of Lagos. We look at the content, the context, the structured usage of slangs involving Yoruba lexicon in Lagos. And then as I go on, we see the reason why I chose Lagos and why I chose the University of Lagos. So let me give a short background information. Slang is a form of language use that involves in-group communication, colorful words and phrases that could be connotatively used, according to Ebley 1996. Atman and James 1998 also concluded that the conceptualization of slang in a society is strongly characterized by social groups and informal language use. Slang has a specificity status, often colloquial. The language and dialect tend to be specific to a particular territory. All these are saying that the issue of group and the language use is very, very vital to the derivation of slangs. I talk about slang and terminologies in a language, because what I'm trying to say and what I've tried to discover is that slang is very, very vital to the development of terminologies in any language, because conventional arrangements without preconceived effort, mostly among the youths in a certain speech setting, could develop to new terminologies, especially when you have a slang being used over time. Because normally slang usage should be periodic, it is time bound, but there are some percentage of slangs that are easily forgotten if they lack broad acceptability. But if they do not lack broad acceptability, such slangs will eventually develop into new terminologies in that particular language. So Lagos is a potpourri of diverse sociolinguistic groups, and that's one of the reasons why I chose Lagos for this study. Population boost has helped in the creation of numerous social groups in Lagos, not only ethnic, but we also have other groups that have emerged due to this population boost. But we should note that Yoruba has the most speakership status, even though there are so many speakers of other languages in the city. The lingua franca in Lagos is basically Yoruba. Slang and lingua franca in Lagos. This work tries to look at how much of the lingua franca lexicons is being used in the slang among the students of University of Lagos. The language of instruction in University of Lagos is English. As I said, lingua franca around that place is Yoruba. And now we look at how much content of Yoruba is involved in the slang usage among the students. Note that what obtains in the wider society in Lagos is the same among the students in University of Lagos, because we have a lot of diverse ethnic societies among the students. For methodology, this work makes use of mixed research methodology, qualitative and quantitative methodologies. Interviews were carried out among the students, and to achieve this, I made use of foregrounding theory, which serves as a framework for this analysis. It is hypothesized that natural language is represented with informal linguistic and sociocultural narratives. 20 students, 10 Yoruba speakers and 10 non-Yoruba speakers are observed and interviewed based on their slang usage during communication. The essence of this observation and interview is to see if sociolinguistic influence could determine the frequency of Yoruba slangs over ethno-linguistic influence. As I said earlier, we have a lot of diverse ethnologies, ethno-linguistic group among the Yoruba, among the people of Lagos State. But then I would like to see how much of their languages are being used, especially during slang usage. Yoruba is a member of the Niger-Congo language family spoken in southwest Nigeria and 8 other West African countries and in 24 countries of the world. There's no doubt that Yoruba language has evolved over centuries. As I said earlier, I concluded that the evolution of this language is also one of the offshoots of the use of slangs over time. It can be concluded that slangs are easily achieved with Yoruba language because of its manipulative capability, which resonated around various literary techniques. For instance, connotation is an important aspect of some Yoruba literary devices, and this is also paramount in slang derivation and analysis. So I'll move on from because of my time. I've said making use of the foregrounding theory to analyze the slangs that are collected from students, and then also to let you know that there have been some works on slangs among students and among the people of Nigeria generally. We have the Adedun 2008 that works on the students of University of Lagos and looks at the manifestation of the multilingual nature of the Nigerian nation. Dozie and Madu 2012 discusses this same slang among the Federal University of Technology students, Owerri. He concluded that student use of slang enhances group identity and solidarity among the students. About 2015 is on the use of slang by Nigerian novelists to navigate through the topic of sacredness of sex and sex-related topics in their works. Ashiro and Ogutu 2018 talks about the instances of slang in selected Yoruba films with the aim of analyzing their derivation and exploring the context in which they are being used. Now, this is the lacuna, this is the gap. The critical analysis of the Nigerian languages being used for slanging has not been carried out effectively. A possible reason for this might be the use of different languages for slanging. We can't take that away. You should know that there are different languages that are involved in the derivation of slangs. But this work looks particularly at the use of Yoruba in the derivation of slangs in a society that has Yoruba as the lingua franca. So data presentation and analysis. As I said earlier in my methodology, I said data were gathered from 2 sets of students, Yoruba speakers and non-Yoruba speakers. For some of this data that are collected from non-speakers, MA4, that do not break, which means do not be scared. Kosiwere, there's no madness. It means there's no problems. Folenu, break mouth, it means to defeat. If you look at these 3 sets of data, you discover that the slangs expresses connotative meaning. The slangs express connotative meaning, I beg your pardon. They also express different meaning. Note that respondents are non-speakers of the language. Respondents are non-speakers of the language, and also note that these respondents are actually they do not speak the language, but they make use of the slangs very, very easily. Although they might not have the literal understanding of the lexicon, the words that are used, but they surely understand the meaning of the slangs when they use them. So this is the observation. Process of learning language and slang is a totally different phenomenon from language learning, because we discovered that these students can make use of slang appropriately, but then ask them to speak in that language, they won't be able to do it. Language of the immediate environment plays a major role in the type of slang usage employed by slang users. So inarticulate Yoruba speakers, they are more fluent in English language. These are Yoruba speakers, but they are not very fluent in the use of Yoruba language. So these are the data I collected from them. Agbafiri Yoyo, a respected person. Kokon Aye, it does not touch the word. The issue does not concern me. Omo Ase, it means dull person. Now, let's note that these words, as used in these sets of slangs, are actually not something these students use in their day-to-day communication. So they might not even know the literal meaning of these words, because when I asked them, I discovered that they did not actually know the meaning of these words, but they know the connotative meaning of the slangs. These slangs are commonly used among students. Their respondents have no understanding of the literal meaning. This indicates that the terms used in slang are Yoruba lexical items, but the terms are not constantly or understandably used in daily communication by the respondent. So the third set, I said, different Yoruba slangs can be used in a way to possess the meaning. So I'm looking at the semantics in slangs now. It's very important because discover that students just make use of this language for slanging, even though they do not understand. Look at this example. We have Gbe and Jewa. Gbe means to carry a course over, and to Jewa also means to carry a course over, but they have different literal meanings. In 6, Igbo is interpreted to mean carry over, and in 7, Ewa is interpreted to mean carry over also. But Ewa and Igbo are actually two different things. But I tell you that these students, they understand these phrases separately, and they know that these two phrases could mean the same thing. This exhibits different antecedents to the derivation of the two slangs. So I look at slangs and grammaticality. The slangs do not follow the grammatical rules of the language in the context. Look at some of the examples I have here. Was, wobi, ojaje, wale. Then another example is mafo. Now, this is my observation. These are ungrammatical expressions, actually, in the Yoruba grammar. For instance, the example 8 defies language internal evidence of final consonants, because in Yoruba language, we do not have consonants, do not end the Yoruba words. In 9 and 10, these examples defy selectional restriction of generative grammar, because we cannot have a case where the market will eat wale. In the generative grammar, it should be the other way around, where wale plus animates would eat something that is edible. Although there can be could mean anything that is edible. And the same thing with mafo. A man cannot break. Man cannot break, but it means do not be scared. And this shows that these slang examples actually defy the language internal evidence of the language. Another observation is the use of pronouns to represent obscure nouns in Yoruba slang usage. These pronouns are actually not very clear. They are clear actually, but we do not really understand the nouns they are representing. For instance, look at the example in 8, otalenu. Otalenu. It means it is very authentic. That is actually the meaning. But O there is the pronoun, and what is the pronoun actually referring to? We can't say, And the same is in 9. We have beifun, carry something for something. Let's say carry something for someone. We do not know what is carrying, but the meaning is actually accord respect to someone. And then the last example is masunle. Masunle, do not sleep, do not be slow, that's the meaning. But do not sleep on it is actually the glossing. So when you say do not sleep on it, do not sleep on what? We do not know. So these are also clearly represented in Yoruba slangs. Nouns represented by the pronouns are not definite in the slangs. They convey the right meaning to the era. So I conclude that language learning is quite different from slang learning. That's just it. With the use of non-Yoruba speakers as part of the respondents during data collection. As I said, non-Yoruba speakers could understand slang very, very well. Slangs that are made of Yoruba lexicons. Respondents who are not fluent in Yoruba language are able to make use of Yoruba slangs conveniently without a complete understanding of some of the terms used in the slang. Sociolinguistic factors of a particular speech community has a stronger influence on non-native speakers of such speech community over the ethno-linguistic effects of the speakers. And lastly, on grammaticality feature of slangs was also displayed in the data that were collected. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Very nice. Very nice. And we stay, in fact, I think, in the Yoruba area, because our next speaker is Dr. Rashak Ajadi from Ilorin, who I see is eager and ready to go. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, sir. Hold on, please. Okay. My talk for this session is titled Living Behind this Mask. The stylistics of Nigerian sexual diversity and homophobic discourse in the digital media. First and foremost, before I go on, I want to especially thank the Alexander von Humboldt for providing this grants, and the Technische University, and especially Professor Joseph Schmid for giving me the opportunity to be part of this presentation, and most especially the African Laws Conference organizer. So from my slide here, the stories of homosexual discourse in Nigeria is well known to be driven by so many diversities and divergences. So I want to look at some of the crux of these divergent stories. The first one here is the stories of clamp down, because this sexual orientation is presumed to be strange to Africans and especially Nigeria. So there are a series of attempts to clamp down on this group of sexual orientations. So the first clamp down that I will talk about is the societal clamp down. This clamp down is traditional because many people in Nigeria believe that homosexuals are misfits. This is a continental belief because we have some African presidents who have made misguided statements about this group of people. The popular example is the late former president of Zimbabwe, Mugabe, who compared the homosexuals as worse than dogs. So because the society will not allow those people to live, and they will not allow them to express their sexual orientation, that led to the legal clampdown, which we can refer to as the 2014 promulgation by the former president of Nigeria, Goodluck Jonathan, who signed it into law, that anybody who is found to express or conspire anybody who is of diverse sexual orientation risk a jail term of 14 years. So with these two clampdown, we have the story of the coming out. The coming out story is a story where the homosexuals and their alternative sexuality try to express, find the media to express their sexual orientation. And for this reason, they took their existence to the digital media, which we can believe to afford them expression and a connection to the global space. So it is quite unfortunate that regardless of this opportunity that the digital media provide for the LGBTQ communities in Nigeria, there are still several elements of clampdown, but this time around, it is not by physical bullying or brutality or brutalization, as I would call it, but through verbal bullying and brutalization. So this aspect of the clampdown is what forms the crux of this discussion. Now, I would like to talk about the knowledge about homosexuality, and I will divide this knowledge into 5 categories. But before I go into that, I would like to state categorically that in Africa, the construction of sexuality dominantly favors the heterosexuals. So, and these are the people who formulate other knowledge about the alternative sexuality. So the first one I will talk about is the colonial episteme. The colonial episteme are those in the group of belief that homosexuality is on Africa. And as you see on the picture on the right, you see a banner displaying that the homosexual is on Africa, freedom is dead. So that is a kind of protest against that belief. So the second group of knowledge is driven by those who believe that homosexuality is genetic, homosexualty is biological. So we see another banner displaying that, oh, this is how I am born, and this is what I want to be. So allow me to give me the freedom to express my sexuality just like the heterosexuals. But even scientifically, there are several arguments about the genetic basis of homosexuality in human. Aware of an experiment carried out through mice, and there are some disruption of hormone to see the sexual behavior of mice. So I think that is a project still ongoing. And the third group are those who believe that homosexuality emerges as a result of sexual fantasy. So you can see from the left too that there is this mental imagery of trying to do or having a different experience from the convention. So the fourth episteme that we'll talk about here is the economic motivated episteme. These are those in the group who believe that most homosexuals are driven by the motive to run away from the economic reality of the country. Therefore, trying to find a connection with those who practice homosexuality for economic benefits, or trying to seek asylum outside the country to live in a better environment where homosexuality is not only accommodated, but also provide an atmosphere that allow them to grow economically. The last one that is of very good interest to the present discussion is the indigenous African languages episteme. So these are those who believe that there are stock of words in the Nigerian languages that speak to the existence of homosexuality. And I try to, through researches that have been carried out, I try to identify some words in the three major indigenous languages in Nigeria, which are Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba. And with that, I was able to call out some words that speak to the existence of homosexuality. And this will serve as the basis of the existence of the sexual orientation in the Nigerian community. And this argument is driven by the position of Richard, 1936, who says that language is no mere signal system. Language speaks to the existing phenomena in a language community and in the culture of the speakers of that language. Therefore, I position that this argument gives validity to the position that homosexuality is actually Nigerian, is not only Nigerian, but it is not as well an accident that is occasioned by colonialism, which we are trying to acknowledge, we are trying to decolonize rather. So the purpose of my study, my aim and objective here now is to carry out a stylistic analysis of Nigerian sexual diversity and homophobic discourse in the digital media. There have been several studies around this issue, but I am looking at three basic features or concerns in homophobic discourse in digital media. And one of them is I want to examine the discursive features of homophobic tweets. And secondly, I like to investigate the use of negativity, agentive and affectivity, and the role of silence in digital homosexual discourse. And I would also like finally to find out the extent of the linguistic affordances and the degree of presence that the digital media actually confer on the LGBTQ persons. Now, to do this, I anchor my study on the theoretical framework of stylistics, which according to Bock 2014, claim to be a kind of stylistic is seen as a linguistic forensic approach to the analysis of text. But my orientation here is tilted towards discourse stylistics. And to go quickly to, I have a methodology, but to go quickly to my findings, after the examination of the linguistic negativity, agentivity, and affectivity, I discover, and that informed my conclusion, my position that the patterning of African knowledge in the direction of theories that are drawn from the West is consistently impeding the accommodation of alternative sexuality. And what informed this position? This position is informed by the fact that many of the stock of lexical items that speak to the existence of homosexuality in Nigeria are presented in negative light. Therefore, they are considered as taboo, and the reference, what that word represents in the physical existence, are considered as misfits and aberrations. So, and secondly, the suppression of autochthonous African knowledge is therefore aided and made effective by silencing of the indigenous linguistic resources that can speak to. So silence is one major factor that is impeded, because those people are bullied and they recoil, and even when they tweet, even when they are on the digital media, the silence is so formidable, is so pronounced that when they drop when they tweets that come after, they don't participate in the tweet anymore. And this position converge with that of Oloruntoba Oju 2010, who says that our culture, our mores and observances socialize us into believing what may or may not be expressed. But and to push that forward, I conclude that colonialism cannot be solely held responsible in turning African knowledge, indigenous knowledge against itself, even though colonialism has further helped in silencing African knowledge production by fostering dominant Western views on the colonized through the consistent use of the other tongue, which is the English language. So with my conclusion, I hereby discover or conclude that even when the digital media exists and give existence to the homosexuals, it has not afforded them the acceptance that they clamor for even up to now. And this is because the language of expression still connects the ideals of homosexuality to the West. I therefore recommend, finally, that that the study of silence should be pushed forward. And this should be in connection with the linguistic and psychological effects that silence has on online homosexual engagement. So thank you very much for your time and for listening.
Thank you very much. That was a nice presentation. And I think we are going to stay in the same mode, more or less, because our next presentation is also on narratives of homosexuality. Let's all blame the government. Paul, the floor is yours.
Well, maybe let me start while Paul is going to upload our presentation. I can also put the link to the presentation into the web here. Maybe that helps. So you can download it from here. If you click on that, you'll get to the web page, and I will just do the first few pages before Paul continues, because you can see that this is a joint piece, and you can also see here at the bottom that Paul and I were brought together through the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, and Paul and Taiwo and Adaji and Ibu Kun as well. They're all my guests at Chemnitz University. So this is a joint work, and you can probably see from the colors that there is still a lot of Yoruba color in it. There are, however, a few headers and a few page numbers that may be the German contribution. I'm more responsible for the methodology and for the general frame, and the actual detail comes, and the interpretation within the Nigerian context, of course, comes from Paul. So you have seen before, and you're seeing here, that homosexuality in Nigeria is a big issue. And next, we'll just do a next slide, yeah. And we'll just do a few central assumptions so that you understand what Paul is going to demonstrate later. So we think that the digital space allows civic engagement and can be a crucial resource for spearheading decolonization of the mind, the topic of this conference. Language use and usage in the sense of different varieties of languages on social media platforms provide insights into attitudes to and perceptions of queer sexuality in Nigeria. The contemporary constructs on queer sexuality have roots in colonial and post-colonial experience. That will be very obvious in a moment. Social media discourse reveals expectations from the two major ideological divides on the role of the government on issues around queer sexuality, and the digital revolution creates new ways of linking, learning and contesting, and then again decolonizing the mind. So we look at this instead from a top-down to a bottom-up perspective, because we also want to contest old concepts of what is European, what is African, and we want to initiate an open-minded discourse and present the complex personalities and identities in the multilingual and multi-modal Nigerian context. And from now on, Paul, I think you can continue. Thank you so far.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Professor Schmid. Yes, he's laid the foundation for the discussion this evening. We are working around 4 crucial keywords. These are language, queer sexuality, decolonization, and of course, government. And this has been these 4 words have been coming up in discussions during this conference. So language is crucial in discussions or narratives around queer sexuality. And of course, this has been evoked in the colonial narratives concerning Africanness, identities. And of course, it also emanates or also shows itself in when you consider how colonialization has subjugated the colonized people, and of course used to reinforce Western supremacist and hegemonic tendencies. There have been some foundational discussions on decolonization when you look back to the works of Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, and several other, Fanon and all, who have talked about how there is need to decolonize epistemologies and attitudes, behaviors, and what have you. And of course, in more recent times, we've also found these manifestations in the hashtag Roots Must Fall movement, Fees Must Fall in South Africa, and then of course the aftermaths of the George Floyd murder in the US and the Black Lives Matter movement. And so it simply shows that, the people keep grappling around decolonization and what the colonial experience has meant. But more specifically, we'll be exploring these within queer narratives, and these were called online from Twitter. But the issues around decolonizing language, of course, while we do not use that term in Nigeria particularly, but there have been several attempts at decolonizing knowledge in Nigeria. And so you could talk about the First Act 77, which was done in the spirit of advocating or making moves towards uniting Black African arts and cultures. You had the Fafunwa Ife 6-year primary project, which was, which advocated, of course, that mother tongue should be used in teaching Nigerian pupils. Of course, Bangbushi says that there are lots of issues around this, and that's why despite the knowledge of the possibilities of this, all of these advocacies haven't really manifested or been implemented. And so, but it simply shows that the colonial heritage, of course, suffuses social practices in Nigeria, and this manifests in attitudes within different contexts and discourses. But like I said, specifically, we are considering sexuality discourse and how decolonization can be done there. So for our data, we are looking at homosexual narratives culled from Twitter. We have a very large corpus, over 800,000, which were sourced through keyword searches using some specific keywords. These were processed with ANCONC and, of course, analyzed with the critical discourse analysis. We paid attention to certain lexical choices and how these can draw attention to neo-linguistic practices which frame the discussion of the decolonization of homosexuality in the Nigerian digital space. So, yeah, what did we find out? For one, and which is not surprising anyway, as a sociolinguistic realization, we identified that English language continues to be the dominant language on Nigerian Twitter. But of course, these have been supported by the 3 major languages and a few other indigenous languages which play very marginal roles. But more importantly, in this specific data, we had more realizations of Hausa and Yoruba languages, but there were allusions to Igbo cultural context in some cases. We'll see those later. But most importantly, there are 2 critical divides that we identified. The anti-homosexual narratives, which were couched in different concerns, the first of which is the religious and cultural concerns. And there you found references to religion and culture as ways of delegitimizing queer sexualities and representing them as bad, as unwanted, really. And so they were presented as being signs of the end of time, and that the people who practice homosexuality are going to be destroyed, just like Sodom and Gomorrah, like you have in the example here. Of course, there are lots of lexical choices that were more of personality attacks to show these negative attitudes to queer sexuality. So you have expressions from English like homo, fag, gay, sick, stinking, and what have you. And then, of course, you also have practical reinforcements where people intentionally use some words to say that they do not want to be associated with queer sexuality. So when you have people who, for instance, a man who says another man is handsome, but quickly punctuates the expression with no homo, which is to say, yeah, I appreciate you for who you are, but no homo, I don't have homosexual tendencies. It's like throwing it in the open to show that I don't want to have any affiliation with anybody of queer sexuality. Then, of course, like the earlier presenter identified, there were realizations of indigenous lexical items to refer to queer sexualities. So you have Liwadi from Hausa, Ado Dio, and Ado Furo from Yoruba. it's interesting that, for instance, with people who argue that queer sexualities are foreign to the African soil, linguistic researches show that when you have expressions for certain attitudes and behaviors or lexical choices, nouns particularly, they signify that these things exist within the cultural context within where you find these words. So it simply means that these attitudes, these practices are indeed traditional. They had always existed. But it's interesting to find out that these lexical choices are more interested in the sexual practices, because they talk about anal penetration. So they do not see the personality of the people, but instead are concentrated on the sexual practices. So it's only Yandauda, which is another lexical choice or expression among the Hausa that is not really negative. So according to Bear Zanello, they say that these lexical choices are insulting and, of course, reinforce heteronormative values. We also quickly explored how history is used in these narratives. And so in talking about history, we have 27 hits from data, and there are various ways in which history is couched. So for instance, for people who want to denigrate homosexuality, they want to erase history and say homosexuality, we are on the wrong side of history because we are becoming open to homosexuality. So they are simply looking to erase history and to say that homosexuality or queer sexualities are strange. But of course, there are people who also use history to support and to say that queer sexualities are not really strange. And so here you have instances where history and culture are used for pro-homosexuality advocacies. And so, for instance, someone here refers to their first experience of what gay movement is about and says that Yandauda is not strange and that they've been part of Arewa, which is a demonym for the northern part of Nigeria. And that the person said he had the first experience of gay marriage in Kano in 2013, which is to say that this move, yes, we are mindful of the time, that this move isn't particularly new, and that they knew about the Yandauda even before they knew the English equivalent of it. And so someone here also says about an Alafin who is a traditional Yoruba king who is said to be queer in sexuality. And so through all of these references, you find ways through which people seek to negotiate their stances, whether in support of or against homosexuality. So here we are looking at who do you hinge the responsibility on? Are you talking about decolonization solely for the sake of it, or who do you hinge? Who is going to decolonize? We identify that the government has a crucial role in deciding or charting a direction in these narratives. And so, but of course, among the users of Twitter, people whose comments we used, you found that the government was actually placed in the middle. The anti-homosexual tweets charged the government on the necessity to have a tougher stance on the queer community through requisite legislation and implementation. While on the other side, the people in support of homosexuality upbraid the government for failing to uphold global standards of human rights and for failing to protect marginalized communities. And so while decolonization as a trope is used by the two sides to reinforce their stance, for instance, those who are against homosexuality, want to erase history to say that, what is happening contemporarily is the right thing to do, and that homosexuality and queer sexuality should be banned. People who are in support of homosexuality are using history or the colonial experience to say that these people have always existed and that the government has to protect them. So in all of these, languages are quite central, because how language is used, of course, can have positive and negative implications. So there is a need, of course, to identify the contexts within which all of these are happening. And then, of course, to propagate African epistemologies, include those related to marginalized sexualities. So in conclusion, it is necessary to look at traditional or pre-colonial African sexualities, because they have positive and promissory implications for minoritized sexualities. And so what we have currently, contemporary homophobia, continues to repress and render invisible non-heterosexual, people of non-heterosexual orientations. And of course, this contrasts, what was the reality pre-colonially. Thank you very much for listening. Here are some of our references. And of course, if you want to continue the discussions outside of the conference, we have our emails available, and we'll be ready for collaborations and more discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our presentations. In the meantime, two announcements. Professor Tom Dietz thanks you for a very interesting panel, which he had to leave a little bit earlier because he's being interviewed about the conference right now. Normally we would now give the chance for some questions and discussions, and for a little reflection by Taiwo, our convener of the panel. But I see that in the meantime, Professor Bakayan Monsef, who was supposed to speak earlier, has also been able to join us.
Hello.
Hello. I was wondering.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
I mean, I had, let's say, some technical problems.
Okay.
I mean, let's say, for example, the diapositive is not working, so
Can you just take a few minutes?
At home.
Okay, so you are not in a position.
I can if you want, I can make, let's say, a brief exercise about my paper. I mean, later on, if it is possible.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair enough, I think.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, I think later I can bring it up, I think. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Well, this session ends in 10 minutes time. So there is not going to be much later to this session.
Sorry, I thought what he was suggesting was that he would bring the paper up maybe at an after forum or
okay, yes.
I thought that was what he was saying. Prof Monsef, was that what you were saying?
At a different occasion.
Yeah, I mean, as part of the continuing discussion of the panel, I thought that was what he was saying.
Good. Yes, that's true. After all the materials are still available online through the conference website. Taiwo, you have seen some of the discussions taking place in the chat. You have also seen the various presentations. What are some thoughts that you would like to share with us at this point?
Well, okay, it looks like people are not asking questions, so maybe we just try to say that, well, I think we've had a good panel, and we have seen that there is a certain there is a certain commonality that runs through most of the discussions, and that commonality has to do with the fate of African languages and what to do to improve this fate or this situation of African languages. We've seen that in Ethiopia, in South Africa, in Nigeria, and in other places, there is the same story of colonization and continued use of colonial languages, which are largely languages of alienation, because they have alienated a good majority of the citizens of these countries. But of course, there is a facade. There is a facade because when we gather at these conferences, most of the people who come are people who speak very nice English and all that, and it gives the wrong impression that the language is generally in use in most of these countries, but actually it's the elite who use this language efficiently, and they are the people who constitute the army for the language. So the need for decolonization, I think, runs through most of the presentations. Actually, I was listening very hard during the presentations on homosexuality discourse and all that, because I was saying, okay, what are we decolonizing? Is it the concepts of homosexuality or the issue of the language? And it will really be interesting to see how decolonization can come in, perhaps through because the language that comes up in this discussion is largely English, with a sprinkling of indigenous languages. So I think it would be interesting for these papers to enlighten all of us and the other audiences of the papers how decolonization is going to help these discourses. So I am saying that there's that thread that runs through all the all the papers, which means that we are going to have this united theme when we try to bring the papers together. Where there isn't where there isn't unanimity is, yes, there's this search for lingua franca, but what language? I think there's unanimity on the issue of decolonizing to the effect that the English language, French, Portuguese, or whatever other languages, or whatever other colonial languages are in dominant usage in these countries, that they should de-emphasize them. But which languages do we employ? And I think the papers by Beth and Linda and Professor Bukholi, I hope it's still there. There is an interesting synergy, even though no concrete agreement still. There are those who believe that, yes, we can have one language. It's unfortunate that, well, it's that Professor Edith's turn has left, because he was suggesting something that appears a little outlandish, for all of Africa to have one language and so on. But I think one thing that many panelists have agreed upon is that we should be heading towards a polyglossic African linguistic situation, not necessarily one national language in every country, but perhaps a group or a number of languages which can constitute national languages. They will be spoken in the different regions, and then they would gradually emerge as national languages. I can see some of the charts to the effect that even in the West, there are quite a number of dialects. I know that in the United Kingdom, for example, there's this constant struggle on the part of the Welsh, and it's supposed to bring up their languages. So this struggle also happens in these entities, and we can maybe draw some lessons from them. So I think at the end of the day, we are going to have to ask the question, what have we achieved in this panel? And I think we've gained a lot of information about what is happening in various countries in the on the continent, and how we may proceed towards the colonizing the linguistic situation on the continent. And I think we should maybe when the conveners meet again, we should remind members of the suggested deadline for people, for panelists to bring up their papers towards the possibility of publishing them either as a special edition of a journal or in a book publication. Before I hand over back to you, I want to thank Professor Schmidt and Beth. Both of them have done tremendous work trying to put this panel together and to ensure that it functioned well. They have also provided a leadership role during these presentation sessions. The handling of the moderation by Professor Schmidt in the morning was superb, and Beth has also done very well in keeping the panel together. So I just want to say a big thank you to everybody who has been here. Hopefully, by the time we interact again, there'll be a few more activists, a few more Western activists for indigenous languages who are not necessarily Africans. People like, I'm sure Professor Schmidt and Bert, they'll probably look for more activists for indigenous African languages to join them the next time. I want to thank you. There are a number of questions that remain. I was hoping that some questions will be asked about the use of slangs, about Wazobia, and so on. But apparently there is fatigue has set in, and people maybe just want to go and take a rest. So back to you, Bert, and once again, thank you very much, everyone.
Well, thank you for those words, and thank you for what I think was a very good summary of some of the key points that came up during this panel. You were calling on more non-African activists, but from my perspective, for a long time, it used to be mainly good, well-meaning Europeans who were discussing the troubles of Africa. And I think the time has come that these discussions are dominated by Africans. And it's good to see that the internet is now so good that it can actually make this a realistic possibility. So I encourage you, Taiwo, from your end to also bring in more activists and to continue with this process. There is always more scope for discussion than what we have time for. On the other end, we have all been in too many Zoom meetings, so you are also probably all looking forward to going on to the next Zoom meeting. I am certainly in that position. So thank you very much for this, and we will be in touch again with you later about the possibility for a possible publication. And let's continue the debate in various different means. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.